Bonjour, je suis Gabriela Nicolescu, professeure et directrice au département de génie logiciel et informatique à Polytechnique Montréal. C'est un plaisir de donner cette introduction aujourd'hui dans un contexte où les cyberattaques sont de plus en plus fréquentes et de plus en plus sophistiquées. Et c'est ainsi que la cyberrésilience vient comme une approche qui permet de prévenir et aussi de gérer les incidents dus aux cyberattaques afin de minimiser les dommages, mais aussi d'accélérer la reprise des activités une fois qu'un incident a eu lieu. En combinant les disciplines qui sont dites techniques de la cybersécurité, comme l'informatique, et le génie, les sciences, mais également les disciplines qui sont liées à la gestion des organisations, à la législation, au droit et à la cybercriminalité. La cyberrésilience offre de belles opportunités pour la collaboration entre ces disciplines, mais aussi entre les universités, l'industrie et les secteurs, les différents organismes publics des différents secteurs. Productivity losses and reputational risk are on the rise, and when combined with this staff shortcuts that it's affecting currently the industry, this may affect the economical growth and put many businesses that are ill-prepared at risk. So the cyber resilience and focusing on cyber resilience will be a strategy that is realistic and comprehensive and will enable the companies to get rapidly on their feet following successful but unfortunately unavoidable cyber attacks. We are very pleased to welcome here in Montreal today our distinguished guests. Montreal is a dynamic environment facilitating this type of collaboration that enables the business continuity in presence of incidents. So, dans le cadre de ces collaborations, les universités, Polytechnique Montréal et les autres universités jouent un rôle très important, notamment pour l'innovation, la recherche et la formation. Une de nos premières priorités, c'est de former des ingénieurs et du personnel hautement qualifié. Nous annonçons à l'automne un nouveau programme qui est sur la maîtrise professionnelle en cybersécurité pour répondre aux besoins qui sont grandissants de l'industrie dans ce domaine de la cybersécurité. En plus, de nos jours, à tous les niveaux de la société, les experts, les chercheurs, même les citoyens sont appelés à contribuer à cet effort de la cyberrésilience. Et c'est une des raisons pour lesquelles les programmes de certificat en cybersécurité ou les formations cours à Polytechnique Montréal ont été parmi les plus populaires de l'histoire de l'institution. Sur le plan de la recherche, tous les projets sont multidisciplinaires et ils réunissent des experts qui sont dans plusieurs domaines, comme le génie informatique, l'électrique, le civil, mais aussi des experts en cybercriminologie, en droit. Et ce sont des projets d'envergure. Notamment, Polytechnique contribue dans le domaine de l'aérospatial, des finances, Internet des objets et le maritime. Et tous ces projets amènent des innovations très importantes pour les partenaires. We have applauded the creation of Quebec's first Ministry for Digital and Cybersecurity. This ministry has as one of the main mission to build on the forces that are in the present ecosystem here, and Polytechnique and the university play a very important role in this ecosystem. To conclude, I wish to sincerely thank all our guests for their presence and for their insights in our panel focusing on the cyber resilience. Their multidisciplinarity is precisely the background that we need in order to be put on the path towards a society that is cyber resilient. And I wish all of you a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. I also like to express the appreciation of the entire panel for the Conference of Montreal and the invitation. To begin with, let me turn it over to Thierry. Question for you. The cybersecurity is frequently thought of as attacks against computers. You bring a unique perspective to this issue, given your wide experience in the defense industry and other endeavors. And by the way, your company does a great service to us all, especially in this dangerous world, as we've seen how dangerous it can become, by helping to protect all of us. We owe you a debt of gratitude for that. But how do you view the concept of cyber resiliency, and how broad are the challenges in terms of protecting infrastructure? Please let us have your thoughts.
Merci. Je vais prendre un premier exemple et l'affaire de la PlayStation 3. En 2011 déjà, donc ça fait loin. Sony est tombé en panne. Pendant plusieurs semaines, plus de 77 millions de joueurs dans le monde n'ont pas pu utiliser leur console. Voilà un problème que sans doute la cyber-résilience aurait pu régler. Qu'est-ce que la cyber-résilience ? C'est la capacité pour une organisation de délivrer le résultat qui est attendu d'elle, quoi qu'il arrive au niveau de sa cybersécurité. C'est le nouveau paradigme de ces dernières années, quand la cybersécurité met en place les moyens de faire face à une cyberattaque ou tout simplement de protéger ses données. La cyberrésilience, elle, prévoit les moyens de rester performant malgré une potentielle attaque. On est donc en face de ce que j'appellerais plutôt la cybercontinuité. C'est-à-dire, si une société est attaquée, c'est qu'on lui veut forcément du mal. C'est souvent ce qu'on appelle le ransomware, donc le rançon pour pouvoir libérer les ordinateurs qui ont été bloqués. Est-ce que c'est le mal de siècle? Oui, ça peut l'être, d'autant plus que si vous arrivez à prendre le contrôle d'une machine à distance, et j'espère pas d'un réacteur nucléaire, mais souvenez-vous, il y a quelques années déjà, en Iran, la CIA et le Mossad israélien ont réussi à dévarier des centrifugeuses fabriquant, je pense, de l'uranium pour une centrale nucléaire en Iran. Et comment ils ont fait ça? Ils ne se sont pas introduits à distance. Ils ont pu s'introduire en mettant une clé USB dans l'ordinateur, dans l'un des ordinateurs de cette centrale de production. Mais ce que je voudrais vous dire, et on en reparlera peut-être, mais les ordinateurs, c'est une chose, mais qu'est-ce qui nourrit les ordinateurs? Ce sont des câbles sous-marins et ce sont des satellites. Or, depuis un certain temps, les câbles sont ou cassés, ou coupés, ou espionnés. Et je vous signale, je ne sais pas s'il y a des amis russes parmi nous, mais ils ont fait un sous-marin qui permet d'aller à 3000 mètres de profondeur pour espionner le câble. Les satellites, là aussi, je pense que vous avez vu il y a quelques années déjà, la destruction de satellites, notamment par les Chinois, qui pour le moment n'ont visé qu'un de leurs satellites qui ne marchait plus. Mais rien n'empêcherait de mettre à mal un satellite de communication, et je dirais même un satellite civil, qui mettrait à mal les communications d'un pays attaqué.
Thank you. Would any other members of the panel like to comment on this subject? Okay, moving along. Martin, every business, every NGO, every government agency and individual is confronted with growing challenges in the way of cyber threats. Some are extremely sophisticated. Nonetheless, given your wide experience in the field, does much of cyber resiliency involve basic cyber hygiene? Is this the essential building block to developing a truly cyber resilient organization? Please let us have your thoughts on this subject.
Yeah, Robert, I think this is a very great question, a very important question, because when we look at what is happening these days, then we see more and more, as you said, sophisticated technology come up. But when you look at the reality, then we also see that sometimes after a major bug in software, take Log4j, so it takes months or even years to patch at least half of the systems. So fundamental things in cyber hygiene aren't handled well. And during this intro video for this session, we saw some cooks cooking, and you can be as creative as you want if you aren't good in the groundwork and the basics of cooking, all the techniques, you will fail. And the same is true for cyber resilience. If you don't do the groundwork, the patching, the asset management, understanding which systems you have, you can't protect what you don't know. If you don't do these things properly and well, you will not succeed. Just looking at the newest types of attacks, the newest types of cybersecurity technology is not enough. The first and foremost thing is to do the basics well. And this is where we need to start, because otherwise we leave all the gaps, the holes, the attack, so the attack surface open, and this will not solve the problem.
Martin, in your experience, do you have a sense of what percentage, I guess percentage may be an unfair question to ask you, but what, in rough justice numbers, is it basic mistakes that are made by employees in an organization that causes these breaches, or is it more frequently the more sophisticated attacks?
I think a lot of, when you look at the reality, a lot of attacks happen because really basic things are not done properly, not the latest patches installed. Or when you talk with large organizations and they tell you, oh, we had this prominent incident happened, last week, and we spent the first weekend with figuring out which systems might be affected, which systems we need to look after, then it becomes clear that it's rarely the most sophisticated type of attacks. This is true for certain very targeted attacks, but the mass stuff is really standardized attacks to open the doors. And this is where we can work and protect ourselves well with doing the groundwork, with basic cyber hygiene stuff, by the way, that is breached for decades. So when I started my career, I was writing about hardening Windows servers, early Windows Server versions, cyber hygiene at the end of the day. So it's not new, but we still see too many flaws. And if you don't fix that, we always will be in trouble.
Martin, what types of, well, let me take a step back. You have consulted with literally hundreds of companies on cybersecurity. So I'm going to have you give a little some of your trade secrets here. What's the first thing that you do when you speak to them about when you talk about these basic problems? Can you give our assembled group here just in a nutshell the things that you're talking about?
Yeah. So the first thing I bring on the table is, at the end, asset management. Understanding what you have in devices, in software, etc. Understanding how software is composed. So which libraries are used, etc. If you don't know that, everything else will be very difficult. So as I've said, what you don't know, you can't protect what you don't know. So you need to start with this. I think this is really the initial step. I think the other points which are important, because people tend always to look at the technology and there's a problem, we throw a tool on it and hope that it works. Unless you have the right people, internal or external in place, unless you have, as I mentioned, asset management, unless you have also policies and processes and an organization that is well structured. And also, I would say the backup in people, the externals, the whatever security operation center as a service, the managed security service providers that can assist you in the more challenging approaches, then it will not work. And you need this organization with clear, defined accountabilities and responsibilities. You need a planning for the worst case. So your business continuity management, your incident response processes being set up, because when the problem occurs, then it's too late to plan.
Let me throw it out to the rest of the panel. Does anyone else would like to make any comment on this subject? Thierry?
Je voudrais revenir sur la cause d'une infiltration, finalement. Elle est souvent humaine, et c'est vrai que malheureusement, souvent des personnes, employés ou autres, ont cliqué au mauvais moment. Je pense que je ne suis pas le seul ici dans cette salle à recevoir des annonces, des courriels, comme quoi j'ai gagné des millions à une loterie, ou que tel organisme va me rembourser quelque chose. Je reviens sur ces clés USB parce que il y a quelques années, c'est vraiment 5-6 ans déjà, on a dispersé le quartier de la Défense et le quartier des Affaires, c'est un peu comme chez vous, le centre de Montréal, et on a dispersé une dizaine de clés USB à l'entrée, au parking, un escalier. Sur les 10, il y en a 8 qui ont été enclenchés. Donc s'il y avait un virus, c'était mal fait. C'était dommage. Les employés doivent être testés régulièrement par justement des annonces de prix ou des choses comme ça. Mais malheureusement, Monsieur X, mon ami, va m'envoyer ses photos de vacances. Et si je les ouvre, c'était pas Monsieur X qui me les avait envoyées. Donc tout ça est très pervers et c'est bien le risque humain au départ.
I might jump in as well on that. So we're hearing a number of themes come across. We're hearing the theme of continuity, which is really important. I'm speaking to you as a lawyer. So when I approach this and I approach any type of breach incident, the first thing I am thinking about is what is the nature of the incident and what is the data that has been compromised. So increasingly what we see emerging is that there are different legal regimes that apply depending on what the nature of the data that's impacted. Nevertheless, that concept of continuity is incredibly important because the moment there's a breach, and you heard Martin just say this, everything stops as we try to assess what is the context of the breach, what happened, who did it. What we find, actually our privacy commissioner from years ago put out some really good research on Canadian breaches and found that the majority of Canadian breaches that are triggered because of compromise to personal information, which is one specific category of a breach, they were majority caused by employees that were mishandling data or were unauthorized to access that data. So the concept of education that we heard in the last panel over and over again could not be more applicable here as well. So just to underscore that theme of, we've got this concern around continuity. We have to be analytical and think and understand what is the context of the breach. We are trying to maintain our systems up and running. There are increasingly different systems that apply to different natures of breach because everything over time is connected. And since the sort of COVID period, we have all gone online. More and more things are connected. So more and more is subject to a potential breach and a potential attack. And we really need to be conscious of those distinctions as we approach what cyber hygiene looks like. It's about many different things, including at first instance, what are we talking about? Like, what is the regime that applies? What are we talking about? What is the nature of the incident? And then how do we maintain that continuity for business or for other purposes?
Yeah. And if I can step in.
Yes.
Carol, I think these are really important points you bring. And what I always say is, once you're connected, you are under attack. what we must not underestimate is that the most attacks are automated. We have the targeted attacks, yes, but we have continuously running automated attacks. And so you have to assume when you connect something, then it is under attack. And so you better start thinking about how can you not only protect it, but how can you detect things? And what is frequently fully underestimated is how can you recover? Because when we talk about continuity, the first thing means recover, bringing the business or the part of business that is affected back to work. And I think part of the planning is also how can we recover? I remember a conversation with the CISO of a Swiss bank, and he asked me, Martin, what do you think, how long would a bank that is where the core systems are heavily hit by an attack, which is really out of business, how many days will the bank survive? The answer of him was, and he surely knows better than me, 2 or 3 days. So we need to prepare. We need to look at recover and at continuity.
Thank you, Martin. Any other comments on this subject from the panel? Socrates, let me ask you a question here. Building on the fundamental hygiene concept, given the breadth of your experience and your status as a global thought leader on the subject, how can we achieve cyber resilience of IT and OT integrated systems? Let us have your thoughts on that subject.
Thank you, Robert. This is a slight change, or should I say extension of the subject, because up till now we've been discussing mostly, if not exclusively, IT. So hardware, software, data, and so on. But there is around us, particularly in the past few years, this has been more visible than before. There is another kind of technology, operational technology or OT, which for the purpose of the discussion, let me clarify that it is the software and the hardware that monitors and controls devices, processes, and infrastructure, and is of course used in industrial settings. So whereas IT is about computers and data, OT controls the physical world. And now, for the past maybe a decade or so, we've seen this integration between IT and OT. Not convergence, but the integration. Convergence has happened a long time ago when OT started using IT. But nowadays, OT systems are increasingly connected to IT and through IT systems to the internet. And this, of course, brings about many cybersecurity challenges. Now, a few thoughts about how to secure such kinds of systems, which may not be as visible as IT systems are to the average person, but certainly some of the cyber incidents that we have witnessed lately have been have received quite some attention in the media as well, with probably the most prominent one, the one on the Colonial Pipeline in the US a few months ago, and several others. Now, a few thoughts on how to achieve cyber resilience with that. First of all, that has actually been said before. I think Martin mentioned this, and it's quite correct. But when we talk about cybersecurity, many people think that this is about technology. It's not. Cybersecurity is about technology, but it's also about people, and it's also about processes. And if I may attempt to quantify a little bit what was qualitatively said before, that many or most of the attacks, the cyber attacks, are due to human error. In fact, a very recent study concluded that almost 95% of the successful cyber attacks are due to human error. So, of course, we are interested in sophisticated cyber attacks, regardless if it's against IT or OT or both. But mostly we should be concerned with educating humans about cybersecurity. So this is point number one. Point number two is that cybersecurity and therefore cyber resilience is not a product, it's a process. And therefore, this is something that it's a continuous process of improvement and should be thought like this. It's not something that we do once and we forget it. We do it continuously. Now, coming back again to one point in the discussion before, when you asked, what do you start from? This is a very good question because cybersecurity can be a difficult subject to explain to people that are not experts with cybersecurity, even more so if you try to explain what to do with it. I have found that a good way of structuring a discussion about cybersecurity is around the American National Institute of Standards and Technology framework for improving cybersecurity, which was originally developed for improving the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure in the States, but nowadays is being used for practically every domain. And the main points there are 5 functions that one should consider in every cybersecurity program in any organization. So we start with the identify function, which is actually includes what Martin said before about knowing what you have to protect, actually. But not only that, it's only about identifying the risks and making decisions about what to protect and what not. Then the second function is measures to protect, so protective measures. But then, if we were 20 years ago, then we would stop there. Because 20 or 30 years ago, we were thinking, and actually this was the security doctrine at the time, we were trying to keep the bad guys out of closed systems. Now, the assumption is very different. We know that we will be attacked, and therefore we need to have in place measures to detect attacks. And this is the next function in the framework. But even more, we know that we will be successfully attacked, and therefore we need to have their measures to respond to the attack, which means actually to sustain the attack and contain the damage as much as possible. And the final function in the framework is the recover function. Because again, we know that we will be successfully attacked. No matter how much we try to be cyber resilient, there will be cases in which case the damage will be so big that we will be forced to recover some at least of the operation of the business. So to just wrap up, I would suggest if someone asks how can we achieve cyber resilience in IT, OT integrated systems, but not only in these systems, in fact, I would say that these are the basic steps that one needs to follow. Even then, there is no guarantee that cyber resilience will be there, because of course there are other issues, and of course there are hundreds of other questions that come up. So how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you know that it works, and so on and so forth? But I would use as a starting point this five functions of the US list.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else on the panel have any comments on that subject? Socrates, it strikes me to some extent, maybe the greatest challenge is detection, because at least you can't begin your defensive maneuvers until you're aware that you've been breached. And my understanding is frequently these breaches can go on for a long period of time without being detected.
Mm-hmm.
Your understanding is quite correct. In fact, the most difficult threats to counter is what we call advanced persistent threats, or APTs for short, where a system or an organization has been penetrated, the attack has already been launched and it has been successful, and some malware is residing in your systems, giving information away to the attacker, sometimes for years before the attack is launched. And unfortunately, we still don't have a certain way of detecting these kinds of advanced persistent threats. There are indicators that we can use and we use, but some of them, if they're sophisticated enough, they do escape. And of course, this is not the only case where we cannot detect attacks. In fact, there exists a certain category of attacks, particularly against IT/OT systems, which we call stealth attacks, that leverage the physics or the laws of physics, according to which it is simply mathematically impossible to detect that an attack is taking place, because the attack is, I'll use a technical term, but it will be understandable, I hope, because the attack is unobservable. You simply cannot, by the physical laws, detect something is happening. So yes, unfortunately, you are quite right in your understanding, Robert. There exist attacks that we cannot detect.
Let me pose a question to Martin. Coming back to the concept of cyber hygiene, as a society, do we need to be more mindful of the subject given the pervasiveness of the challenge of cyber threats, even to every individual? When do we need to start educating people on this subject? How wide among the population should this threat be addressed? It's almost a fundamental societal problem, perhaps, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that subject.
Yeah. So today we have heard quite a lot already about people making mistakes and attackers using the fact that at some point people will make mistakes. So if you just try your attacks against sort of a big enough number of people, potentially someone will make a mistake. And what I very frequently hear is people talking about the human being the weakest link in cybersecurity, which to a certain extent, also taking some of the numbers that have been mentioned here, to a certain extent might be true, but I still believe we should think differently here. So first, it's not very motivational when we say, hey, you're the weakest link. The other point is there's another angle of that, and this is the human is the first line of defense at the end. The humans are the ones who observe strange things happening, strange mails coming into the inbox, etc. And I believe we would be much better suited to stop saying the human is the weakest link and to say the human is our first line of defense, and we need to strengthen the humans. We need to do that. And with everyone being connected in the daily life, young children having already their smartphones and their iPads and whatever, we must not wait until university, where then a few, very, very few people become cybersecurity professionals compared to all the number of all the students. What we must do is, I think in every society, we must start not only the education in using these tools. A lot of this comes automatically. Small children are very good at swiping. Probably most of the children are way faster in typing messages and doing a lot of things than I am. But at the end, we must also do our share in saying, okay, and explaining in simple terms what can go wrong. At least creating the sensitivity for what is suspicious. And this is, I think, what we need to do way earlier, and we need to do it way broader. So I think this is just a baseline knowledge and a baseline part of education nowadays, when everything builds on technology, on connected technology. Then, we have a driver's license for safety reasons. And we need some sort of at least a baseline education for security reasons. That's the other term in this space as well, I believe. And I don't think that we do enough. There are surely countries that do better than Germany. So Germany is surely not a very best example here. But I believe that in virtually every country, there's really a lot of room for improvement to start early, which also means you need to educate the teachers, so to speak, the people who teach it. You need to start in all these areas. And I remember when I started still studying and started, so to speak, my career, and I gave some computer classes. In one of these computer classes, my teacher for mathematics from my 6th grade became an attendee of one of my classes to learn a little bit of basics so that she can educate others in IT, on IT. And that is not the right way. We need to get better here.
Martin, fascinating concept that in our defense in-depth strategy for cyber resiliency, the human being is the first line of defense, and like in any line of defense, it's usually the most important of those because it gives you the warning, gives you the ability to stop the threats early on. Anyone else on the panel like to comment on this subject?
Yeah, Robert, if I may just pitch in.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I fully agree with everything that Martin said, starting from the fact that, yes, we do see the humans as being the weakest link. That's because of the statistics of these successful attacks. But we really should be looking at them like the assets they are. And as assets, we need to educate them and train them so that we can get the most out of them. So that's number one. Number two, this also shows the need for training and education. And to the question, how early should we start doing this? Well, I would say, when do we start teaching our kids that they should brush their teeth every day? This is basic hygiene, isn't it? Well, with technology as it is and as we live with it today, when do you think that we should start teaching our kids? I think as early as possible. And in fact, I know that for more than 3 decades now in Israel, I believe, cybersecurity, or at least the basic concepts of that, were taught at kindergarten. And of course, there are already programs in the US in introducing cybersecurity in K-9 education. At NTNU, my own university in Norway, we do run a pilot course for educating high school teachers for teaching cybersecurity in high school. And we also have developed material for high school and also for vocational training, because it's not only about university. Only a few will go into university and have the chance of being educated about cybersecurity. But this is not the goal, right? I mean, the goal is, for a cyber-resilient society, it takes everyone to get involved and everyone to be aware, at least, of what needs to be done. And therefore, we need to start quite early.
Thank
Robert,
you.
I'm just going to jump in there because we talk a lot about, or we are talking a lot about, sort of early, education for kids. And I think that's, having 2 kids of my own, I can fully appreciate the importance of early education. But in Canada, we're struggling with educating boards. Like, we're still struggling with getting boards to buy into the concept that you need to invest in proper cybersecurity and effective hygiene. So to the audience here, going back to your organizations and being really clear about the importance of cybersecurity and good cyber practices is really critical. We don't yet have effective, standardized or harmonized approaches to new entrants to companies to get effective training in good cyber practices or good data practices. So typically the entry point will be some requirement around privacy training. And then the hope is that in that privacy training, you will also include elements of cybersecurity or good cyber practices as well. But we don't have that same level of requirement. Now, it may be introduced. I mean, we have new law that has been introduced in Canada that might change a lot of that, but we don't have it yet. So going back to your organizations and going to the boards, going to the C-suite, and then having it trickle up and down is really critical, because even within your organizations, you're probably not at the level of cyber readiness that you think you are, or certainly that you should be.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's about lifelong learning, or in the organization, it's about repeating, because it doesn't help just say, okay, one training done. We need to be very, very consequent, also up to date. By the way, I have the feeling it's way easier to do good cybersecurity training these days, because I always explain it more from the personal life. So what happens on your own smartphone, on your own bank account? If you understand that, you understand a lot about what you need to look at in your organization.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because when I do the training, I always talk about, here's what it looks like to be in the eye of a data breach. And then I describe what it's like to be that person that everyone is trying to investigate to understand if you were the actual source of the data breach, because now there is an entire process that flows with the possibility of class action lawsuits and regulatory investigations. And this is what it feels like. I understand we shouldn't say that they're the weakest link, but at the end of the day, this is what it feels like to sit in the eye of that storm. So here's how you as an employee or as a member of this organization have an active role to play. I don't care if you're the administrative assistant or you're the CEO. Everybody has an active role to play in making sure that they've got good data practices. And here's why you should care.
Thierry, you had a comment?
A few comments, yes. You maybe vous devez vous souvenir des premiers pirates aux États-Unis notamment, qui ont craqué les sites, je ne sais plus, FBI et CIA, en tout cas la NASA. Ils avaient 15-16 ans. C'était un challenge. Ça n'allait pas plus loin. Alors les enfants et l'informatique, je vous entends et je suis d'accord avec vous, mais quand je vois dans des poussettes des gamins, des gamines de 2-3 ans qui sont déjà avec l'iPhone, pourquoi? Parce que les parents veulent avoir la paix. Moi, je trouve ça grave. Sur les attaques, on a beaucoup parlé de l'extérieur, de la fiabilité ou des erreurs que pouvaient faire des employés, mais je voudrais vous rappeler aussi le fait que, et ici il y a eu un exemple tristement célèbre de la Banque des Jardins où un employé a récupéré des milliers de comptes sans qu'on s'en aperçoive. Et par hasard, et comme j'aime bien les nouvelles technologies, j'ai investi il y a une dizaine d'années dans une société qui s'appelle Walix, W-A-2-L-I-X, qui fait de la détection d'intrusion non sollicitée venant de l'extérieur ou de l'intérieur. Et finalement, on peut imaginer, ça a sûrement eu lieu à partir du moment où vous allez vous séparer d'un employé, éventuellement il est directeur commercial, ben, il ne faut pas qu'il parte avec la liste des clients, parce que là ça met en péril. Donc les menaces viennent de partout, alors on peut former tout le monde, mais c'est vrai que la cyber-résilience, moi je la résumerai sur le fait d'avoir toutes les mémoires séparées, et régulièrement, c'est pas une fois par semaine. Donc on met de côté, on transfère toutes les informations qui permettront à la société de pouvoir recommencer rapidement, quelques heures, quelques jours. J'ai connu des sociétés ayant été attaquées, soit débrancher tous les serveurs, ce qui est interdit par le fait que pour l'enquête, ça complique. Et puis finalement, avec une rançon de plusieurs millions, dollars, euros ou autres, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait? Ils ont tout remplacé. Tous les serveurs ont été remplacés. À mon avis, ça a dû coûter 15. Et d'ailleurs, les ransomware, vous pouvez toujours payer, mais vous ne savez pas s'ils ne vont pas vous redemander de l'argent un mois plus tard. Voilà.
Thank you. Let me throw this over to Carol. You've played a significant role on the legal and regulatory front in the area of cyber resiliency. And I think your Canadian experience is a good barometer for the legal and regulatory activities in Europe and North America generally. What do you see as the short and the long-term actions in the legal and regulatory world that are going to come about?
Yeah, so what we've talked about up until now are some of the operational considerations that need to go into good cyber training or good cyber practices in any organization. But from a legal perspective, there are some really notable changes that are happening around the world. So as I said earlier, the sort of approach to regulating a data breach has always used privacy as the entry point. But that's now changing. And really, the Colonial Pipeline is one example of why that has started to change. And it's changing to the entry point being, threats to critical infrastructure and to other sort of critical systems. So in June, Canada introduced new law that is draft, but it certainly puts on the table the protection of vital systems and services with significant government oversight for federally regulated sectors, particularly focusing on nuclear, telecommunications, banking. One sector, obviously, that is not there, as it's not federally regulated, is the health sector, but the health sector has come under significant attack, particularly during the COVID period, which is an unfortunate testament to some of the attackers, but it really has come under significant attack. So we see this change away from purely a privacy play now to a critical infrastructure play, and to ensuring, as we heard earlier, that the importance of continuity in systems, continuity in business operations, so that it doesn't disrupt the way we live our lives. Recognizing, as you've heard from all the panelists, that it's not just about detection, but it's about a quick recovery and containment. So in the legal world, what this means is that there will be significant government oversight of those designated operators. There will be audit abilities for the government and the regulators, the associated regulators. There will be mandatory reporting. There can be some very serious administrative fines if there's non-compliance, and the whole intention is you open up your systems so we can get your systems back and running as quickly as possible, even if we have to start to step in and do that. And by we, really we're talking about the federal government, its specialized outfits, and then associated regulators.
I think we will see in all countries, I believe, greater and greater emphasis on this.
We are. We see that in, just to round that out, we are seeing that's already come to pass in the US, and it's been tabled in Europe as well in, I think it was May of this year. So across the board, we're seeing the attempt to protect this critical infrastructure. And the good news to an extent is that we're seeing sort of a harmonization or consistency in approach in how governments and multilateral institutions are trying to put in place those regulatory obligations. So what we're hoping to get away is a patchwork of international laws and really try to find a more harmonized approach to protecting critical infrastructure.
Carol, are you seeing the unfortunate import into Canada more of the class action lawsuits and that sort of thing on data breaches generally?
Yeah, we are, and we'll see more of that so we had at the same week that we had new law tabled regarding cybersecurity, we had new law tabled to potentially repeal and replace our federal privacy law. And with that new law, there would come a private right of action that would actually see an increase of class action lawsuits more so than before.
We're running out of time, so maybe I was going to let every speaker have a few minutes to speak, but we don't have a few minutes. Let me just throw out one quick idea. What lessons have we learned about cyber resiliency from the Russia-Ukraine war? Any thoughts on that subject?
I'll just throw out that data is a geopolitical issue, and the mobilization of data, the international flow of data, the ultimate use of data is a geopolitical issue. And every company that is operating in Canada and internationally has a role to play and is ultimately impacted.
Thierry, from your perspective in the defense world, any lessons you can give us from Russia, Ukraine?
Je pense que c'est le risque principal. En plus, vous avez des structures, même en France, je dirais heureusement. Au Canada, je ne sais pas, mais vous avez des personnes qui portent l'uniforme et qui sont là pour protéger et même peut-être attaquer. Mais à côté de ces structures, vous en avez d'autres, et en Russie, on le sait, où il y a des geeks, des spécialistes civils, très bien formés. Alors c'est un peu comme leur milice Wagner. Comme ça, les Russes, c'est pas moi, je les connais pas. Enfin, vous connaissez la désinformation russe. Donc il y a un travail très, très important. Et je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, si quelques satellites stratégiques viennent à tomber en panne, alors pas forcément à être anéantis avec un missile, et ça peut arriver, on va avoir quelques soucis. Et il y a heureusement une note d'espoir que je voudrais donner. C'est ce qu'on appelle les lanceurs avec des boîtes à chaussures. Ce sont donc des microsatellites, Monsieur Musk en a lancé un certain nombre déjà, pour faire des constellations autour de la Terre et diffuser Internet, même dans les pays désertiques ou dans les forêts tropicales et tout ça. Et ça peut être quand même une solution par rapport à des trucs qui sont, je ne sais pas, 3-4 mètres d'envergure avec les panneaux solaires, et qui seront plus fragiles. Donc il faut rester à la fois prudent, mais il ne faut pas se faire avoir, quoi. C'est ça le problème. En disant tout va bien, en France on dit, il y avait une chanson, tout va bien, Madame la Marquise. Votre maison est en feu, l'écurie est fichue, les chevaux sont morts, mais tout va bien.
Okay, any last thoughts before we adjourn? Okay, well, I would once again thank the panel very much. I know it's late on the other side of the Atlantic.